the work that I'm going to talk about is intended to look at whether beauty has any real meaning to people. You talk about beauty in the streets to a random selection of people. Do they know what you're talking about? So that's what I'm going to talk about to you now. I'm going to spend most of the time showing film, actually, which demonstrates what people have to say when you talk to them about beauty. I work for the Centre for Cities now, which is a think tank which gives advice to UK cities on economic development, on how to plan for the future effectively. But when I commissioned this research, I worked for CABE, Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, which in the interim has been wound up. So I'm in a different world, but we were always at CABE trying to connect academic research with policy, with influence, with impact. And although I'm lucky enough not to have to write statements of impact, I do have to demonstrate policy impact, which is a parallel dark art. So you can imagine if Joe had odd reactions from colleagues about his interest in beauty, you can imagine what reactions there were within the policy world to looking at beauty as a research topic. It took a long time for CABE, which is responsible for architecture and design quality, to get up the nerve basically to look at beauty, even though it's one of the fundamental tenets of architecture. But eventually we did. Just to put some context around this before I show you the film, we're in a world where decisions about the way places are developed are changing substantially. So localism legislation is going through the Commons at the moment, well, reaching the Lords, and it's intended at least to give power to people in situations where they haven't had influence over the way that their places are developed, but it's also intended to create a presumption in favour of developments through radical planning reform. So the idea is that development will be allowed, and that's a very good reason why it shouldn't be. And bear with me, this may seem a bit tangential to culture, but it leads into the context in which we've asked people about beauty. So neighbourhood plans, which are being introduced as part of the legislation, should allow people to have more say in the kind of development that goes on in their place, to take more direct control. Yet, equally, there's going to be more incentive, more drive for development to happen full stop. So the argument's becoming more polarised. Legislation, the planning system, is going to have less of a role to play. And potentially, people are going to have more chance to be engaged in decisions about things that are quite significant to the way that they live their lives. But we looked at the way engagements worked, whether people are actually engaged in decisions at the moment, and they're clearly not really, not to any great extent. So just so a third of people thought they could influence decisions affecting their local area. That number was going down over 10 years. Fewer than a fifth thought they'd actually taken part in any kind of consultation, a number which had also gone down. And the number who regularly engage in civic consultation, which includes commenting on planning applications, getting involved in local government in any kind of form, is very small, and it always has been. And that's not really surprising, because the debate is conducted in a way that requires you to have knowledge, really, of the system. So you have to come to the system and approach it in a way that uses the language of the system rather than the other way around. The planning system isn't really designed for mass participation. It's designed to be responsive to particular comments and criticisms. We wanted to look at whether there was another way around this, whether you could show that wider concepts of the way that places work and the values that people place on them could be applied to engaging people in actual decision making. So we did some survey work with NESTA. It's actually HRC funded as well. I haven't put it on the slide for some reason. We did a survey of over 1,000 people, so pretty substantial stuff. And we ran discussion groups in Sheffield and made a number of ethnographic films with Maury, asking people for views and investigating the way that they reacted when beauty was brought up in conversation related to the city in which they live. So I'm going to show you a film which was one of the outputs from the work, and it's about 10 minutes long. It's an edit of the research that we did at the essay of the
beauty?
Oh, that's a hard one.
I don't know.
Can you tell me you experience beauty?
In the mirror.
What do you mean?
Beauty is being pretty, I guess. Being pretty and, like, you know, those perfect. Being the perfect person, that's beauty.
When beers proper, like, do himself up, like. That's it.
Well, yeah, when you say beauty, you straight away think about yourself and how you're trying to make yourself look.
Beauty to me is nature at its best.
Think about Sheffield, it's got natural beauty. Around every corner you got a view, you got a hill. So when you leave Sheffield, like I was living in London for 3-4 years, that's where I really appreciated and missed Sheffield. The greenery and the hills, they're the main two things.
I was in college actually, to be fair, I was doing A-levels at Longley. But obviously I dropped out because of him. He's everything. It's quite good actually having woods so close. This is Charnock Woods. It's like when it's sunshiny, it looks nice, doesn't it? And it's somewhere you get all like pretty blossoms and stuff, a lot of trees and that. Some of my friends don't appreciate things like this. Like I'll say, oh, I'm going on a walk in woods, they'll just laugh at me, do you know what I mean? Whereas I like to. They'll go to the pub to socialise and I'll pick you up and we'll go to Chatsworth or we'll go to Bakewell or go to Padley Gorge or something. And they'd rather just stay in pub and have a fag and a drink. I suppose that's their beauty to them.
But everyone's got the ability to tap into beauty. If you want to really find beauty, there's natural beauty everywhere. I mean, I or other people might live in an area and you might think, oh, it's rough, but really, they say it's beautiful. They say it's beautiful because you lived in that area. You lived in that area all the life, so you can see the beauty, you can see the beautiful side of that area.
This area we're going into now, I'm very fond of. It might be difficult to understand at the moment with the miserable weather we're having, but first thing in the morning when there's not many people about, it is nice. It's my place, I come here to relax. If ever stressed with work or family life, I'll have a walk along the Don. It's where I come for solitude, I suppose. I mean, that probably to a lot of people looks like a river full of rubbish, which it is, but it's still, in my mind, still a beautiful area. It's memories it's got for me, and it's something I associate with a lot of childhood memories, I suppose. When you're out here on your own, doing your thoughts and appreciating the beauty of it all. For me, it is a spiritual thing, I suppose. It's something that I need to do and enjoy doing.
If you haven't got the money, it's difficult to make your life beautiful. You go to areas that have money or have people of money living in a particular area, you'll see that it's taken care of. People with money have more influence, have a bigger say, are more professional, to the point that they can make that change to their area. They can have a bigger say in the politics of the area.
Where do you experience beauty in your life?
In family life and my surroundings. I do like a nice environment, and we do spend a lot of money on our house. Okay, we'll go to Graves Park because when me and my husband was like kids, like 17, we used to go there every Sunday afternoon without fail. I've never thought about it like I have this afternoon, and it has changed my opinion, because I do think beauty does have an impact. Before I said it doesn't matter, because as long as the inside of where you are is nice, then that's all that matters. But now I actually do think external it does actually matter too.
When you go to a nice area that's really green, it's got flowers, it's got colour, it's tidy, it's clean, there's not much in the way of intimidation or crime or litter. Mentally, it just makes you think nice thoughts, makes you feel better about yourself, about the area, about the community.
All my family used to live here. Literally all my family used to live out in Park Hill. No one wants to think about it, say out about it, and no one even wants to look at it anymore. It's that horrible. when it used to be actually kind of special and it used to be a very nice place. It's like when you wake up in the morning and you look outside, you see this, you feel like just going back to bed and just not thinking about it. Don't think about it, don't look at it. No matter what you do, nothing special if you're living around here. When you're here, it's like not like on Park Hill, because you can tell, can't you? It's like people do care about this, and people do actually think about it, and because when we come up, we actually do clean it, me and my friends, and it sounds daft, but somewhere where we hang out and we actually look after. So a few other people try coming in, vandalising it, but when we do catch them, we do assess them, we do stand up to people. So you think, well, what's point in trashing things?
This is my favourite bit of Sheffield anyway.
This is the most cool area of Sheffield.
In the summer, for example, I'll probably come here with a few of my friends, like usually Dave or something, and I'll play football there, and we could stay here all day.
If you look all around this little area here, there's 3 pieces of litter that I can see. People almost have a pride in it, so because it's seen to be quite affluent. I mean, if they spend time there, it reflects well on them, as we were saying before. Sometimes beauty is what you have, your possessions. If you're always in an area that's clean, people think you're a clean person. This is one of our 2 cathedrals in the city.
But to be honest, hands up, I've never been inside it. I never...
They're great and washed.
What do you think? It's very beautiful.
Stunning, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the main mosque in Sheffield. It's the first purpose-built mosque in Sheffield, which is quite good because it's been a good number of years in the waiting. The architecture of the building is something that you can't get away from because it's classical Islamic architecture with the dome and the minarets. So for those people to say that it looks out of shape, well, obviously it's going to look out of shape as a mosque.
My college that I went to before, it were a brand new building and it were unusually shaped, which made it even more fascinating to look at, and people looked at it and it looked nice to look at, new and unique and modern and stuff. People appreciated it a lot more. There were no graffiti on that college, whereas I can go to Sheffield College and it's there's graffiti everywhere.
I feel like the Sheffield I was taught about when I was younger is definitely getting lost in this modern kind of change that the cities are encountering.
The old and the new, for me, they complement each other. Sheffield Steel, in years gone by, it was pretty good. It was good stuff, and it was top of its game. We've got to keep that part of our history, although a lot of the buildings are derelict. Having that, as much as it does look a mess, to me it doesn't, if you're with me. That's nice to have that, as well as the newer buildings which are popping up to kind of bring it more in line with other cities.
I kind of prefer the modern stuff, so this stuff suits me better than...
I prefer the modern stuff, but I don't want... I never like to see a city lose its heritage or its character, so with a building like that, it still looks like the industrial building it used to be, but it's got more of a modern use inside. So I think it's important to keep the character of the city, because that's what keeps everything unique.
The train station, actually, they made it look beautiful from the outside, but it's not functional. It's not functional at all. The access to and from the station, it's a single lane in, and it's really congested. It gets really built up. People have got a train to catch. They don't want to risk the train trying to get there. But unfortunately, that is the case, because when the people designed the station, maybe they put a bit too much thought into the beauty and the way it looked, and forgot about the functionality side of things.
We wouldn't know what beauty was unless there was also ugliness, to sort of compare it with.
In the 21st century, everything has to be beauty, you know what I mean?
Perhaps there should be a higher priority given to educating people from a very young age in the concept of beauty. It's not brought out, is it? It's not a subject as such in schools. So perhaps beauty should be on the curriculum.
If you didn't have no beauty, you could turn out a wrong person, if you know what I mean. If they were all just horrible stuff in your life and there was no beauty in your life, you're not going to be a nice person, are you really? You're not going to be a friendly person, you're going to be a violent person, an horrible person to talk to. No one's going to want to say hi to you out, you know. So you've got to actually, you know, you look after things look after you, if you know what I mean.
That film brings up a few points about what beauty means to people when you bring it into conversation in that way. It's interesting how, first of all, the interviewers found that people were a little bemused about what they were being asked. So, what do you want to know about that? It's not something that people are officially asked to talk about, because beauty is a subjective concept. It's not something that is therefore easily fitted into policy, into consultation, into the way that government works or the way that systems work. Yet for that reason, it's a different sort of a subject to be discussing with people. And initially, people seem to think about beauty as a surface thing, as themselves, as appearance. The guy at the beginning who says beauty is when birds do themselves up like proper, which is my favourite bit of the film. But after that, it didn't take very long to get past that. And you think, well, yeah, but what about more than just that? People then start to talk really eloquently about all sorts of other concerns. So effectively you get a checklist of all the aspects of urban design that you would want people to be talking about if you consulted them about the place, the way it was put together, the way it was working or not working. And it wasn't difficult to get people to talk about this stuff. So the taxi driver was the taxi driver who took Maury from the station to their hotel, I think, when they arrived. And there's some pretty fascinating people in that, particularly Jack, who's extremely eloquent about what happens when you let a run-down 60s estate go to seed and you don't get your plans right for replacing it, and what the links are between people and ownership of place and self-esteem. So I think those interviews link the concept of beauty to a lot of really fundamental values, in the same way that Joe's been saying. So this fits rather nicely with Joe's discussion earlier on. I think it also illustrates the quote from Iris Murdoch that you put in about beauty being the spiritual value that we recognise by instinct. People have something to say about this. I don't think they feel they need permission to say it either. Once the context's been established, it's something on which everyone has permission to have a view, because it is a personal opinion, yet the personal relates directly to the social, to the needs of Sheffield, of places, the kind of views that local authorities need to tap into in order to build a closer relationship with the people they serve. And backing this up, we did the qualitative research as well, which I mentioned earlier, and some statistics on the overall picture. A large majority of people felt that beauty was important, and a very small number felt that they were too busy to notice it, which we thought was interesting. We thought perhaps, on the list of people's concerns, that might be quite low down, but it didn't seem to be the case. Also, very, very few people thought that beauty was something that access should change to depending on your wealth, your status, which is an interesting finding too, because the taxi driver outside was quite right when he said that beautiful places are those, on the whole, that are more affluent, where people can afford to live. And a large number of people experience beauty in the natural environment. But as you see from the film, the natural environment is an integral part of living in a city. I mean, Sheffield is a particularly good example of that, but nevertheless, the natural and the urban are one. They're not separate by any means. And finally, we asked people who thought they had responsibility for making places beautiful, for ensuring beauty was part of the way that places were managed, and they said it was local authorities, which I think will come as a surprise to some local authorities. I don't think that's something that local authorities feel is directly their responsibility, or B, would expect their constituents to be asking of them. So I think that's a useful point to bear in mind. It also relates this research back to the need for local authorities to think in more detail about how they relate to the people they're serving. I mean, localism is devolving power in many different ways, and you can argue about how that's going to work, whether it will have the desired effect, but nevertheless local authorities will end up having more control over what happens in their area, and therefore I think have more appetite, particularly in cities that have thought about this already, for new approaches to the way that they engage their residents. So finally, I mean, does this really matter? Well, I think it is a route into thinking about the links to place and people who live there. I think it's important to step away from the official language if you want people to take an active role in developing neighbourhood plans, those sorts of official approaches that will be shortly available. If you want to take that beyond the usual suspects, 3% who get engaged on a regular basis, then there needs to be different ways to do it, and this perhaps offers a way. It clearly links to the way that people see themselves in the place around them, so pride and also aspiration, some really direct links in the film between the the places you go to and the way that you're perceived as a result. A green space, which is something that is often relegated to the afterthought of development, is something that comes across as really quite integral to the way that places work for people who live there. And also lots of practical issues, like the way that places are maintained, kept secure, the way that people feel when they're in them, essentially, and why they feel that way, and what influences the way that they perceive the place they're in. I think I'm going to leave that there. This is something that CABE wasn't able to take forward because circumstances got in the way. In my role at the Centre of Cities, I find this still very relevant. I think finding different ways to show local authorities and people who have in positions to make decisions about cities like Sheffield, find different ways to talk to them about what matters and what benefits might be is extremely important. So we need this as well as the economic, and I'm trying to find ways to balance the two out. But I hope that gives you something that you can relate back to the way that you assess impact. I think impact in this case is getting people to say that something matters. So finding the language, the route to do that, I think is perhaps the starting point. But thank you very much.